So I think we have some people online too. Yes. Hi, everyone online. And those of you here, my name is Booker Marshall. I use they, he pronouns. I'm the LGBTQ plus and sexual health program manager in the Office of Student Health and Wellness at CPS, Chicago Public Schools. Hi, everyone. My name is Amari. That's my first name. I do not use a last name, so it's the full Amari. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the YRBS consultant for Advocates for Youth. I also previously was the LGBTQ coordinator for Broward County Public Schools for 6 years. So I just moved from here to Atlanta, and that's where I am based now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amari Butler. I use he, him. I'm the Associate Director of LGBT Health and Rights Advocates for Youth. I did not have a slide on this. I'm only thinking about it now, but we're a national nonprofit based in DC, really working to empower young people through their sexual health and rights. Someone mentioned it earlier, we have a free K-12 curriculum. It's LGBTQ inclusive, known as the 3 Rs. And yeah.
Okay. All right, so our goals today, first and foremost, we're gonna learn about the YRBS. I know some of you are extremely familiar with the YRBS. Some of you are still learning what the YRBS is. I know somebody said, I just learned about it today and now I'm very interested. So this is for you. 2, build awareness and support for this important resource. We're also gonna dissect a little bit about some of the controversies surrounding YRBS. Objectives, increase understanding of youth risk behavior survey, and identify applications to respective programs and initiatives. So first and foremost, to break the ice, does your district have its own YRBS? Raise your hand if you know. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Does your individual school district?
Did until 2021.
Yeah, correct. Because Florida is not. Hey, Kevin.
I worry.
Sorry, I love that. All right, so does your state participate in YRBS? Your state. So we have district level YRBS, and we're going to talk about this in a second. There are some school districts like Broward County had the YRBS, Palm Beach County had the YRBS, Miami had the YRBS, Duval County had the YRBS, and no longer, all 4 of those places no longer do. So does your state? Anybody know?
We did.
We did, yes. Florida absolutely did. I know Illinois also had a statewide survey, in addition to the school district survey and CPS. And who is comfortable with data? And we don't mean the YRBS, we just mean data. Like raise your hand if you're one of those people who can look at a bunch of numbers and get excited. Wow, all right, that's a math teacher in the room. Not the music teacher. No, the music is very mathy. So it is, musical therapy is, okay, thank you. All right, so the basics of the YRBS, number 1, it is the largest public health surveillance system in the United States. That's extremely important to understand. It is a national survey, and it is the largest, and it is by a reputable organization, our federal government, the Center for Disease Prevention and Center for Disease Control and Prevention. It monitors health-related behaviors among middle school and high school students, though there are small variations between the middle school questions and the high school questions. The results help in understanding factors that contribute to leading causes of illness, death, and disability among youth and adults. So these trends change over time, right? So this survey started about 30 years ago, and 30 years ago, high school students were smoking cigarettes, and that was harmful to their health. So what we've learned recently with the YRBS is fewer children than ever are smoking cigarettes. Yay! More children than ever are vaping. No, right? So we have to change the questions to keep up with the trends going on in society. And what we're learning is not only are they vaping, they're vaping like really cheap vapes because they're kids, they can't afford more expensive things, and they're literally filling their lungs with like harsh metals, right? So that's going to cause certain disabilities and deaths. So if you're vaping, right, when you're on the football team, filling your lungs with harsh metals, and then we have COVID, that may negatively affect your ability to get over COVID, right? So that's why this survey is so important, because of everything that's happening both in society and within our bodies. It's again managed by the CDC and within the Division of Adolescent and School Health, and it has been around since 1990. So when we hear that states like Florida opt out, what happens to 30 years of data? Right, what happens with that? Now Florida has said, oh, we're gonna replace it. We're gonna do a new survey, we're gonna do our own. But it's not as scientific as it was before, and it's completely incomparable to what they have been doing for the last 30 years.
Have you seen it?
I have not seen it, but I saw who's on the commission to write it, and I had many concerns.
It's horrible. It's like,
Go ahead.
It's like, do you feel your school is addressing mental health issues at a scale 1 to 5? I can send it to you because Heather sent it to all of us.
Okay.
It's horrible.
Wow.
Next slide.
All right, so the purpose, again, national focus on behaviors related to health concerns, assessing how risk behaviors change over time, as we just said, following those trends, and we provide comparable data and data over time. There are 2 different surveys and they are administered every other year. So this year, 2023, the next survey will be administered. We just received the 2021 survey data, and that is because of a delay because of COVID. And the 2021 survey data, which we're going to go over in a little bit, was abysmal. It was terrible, and we're going to go over what trends possibly cause that to be terrible. One, again, there is a national conducted by the CDC with the majority of states, but not all of them. Only a few states opt out, like 4 or 5 of that national states, conducted by state and local education and agencies. This is the standard one that we said is more so with districts or with an agency that works with a school district. There are also optional questions that state and local education or health agencies can add. However, there is a process for adding questions. For example, we were talking to some organizers in Alaska, and in Alaska, they attempted to add a question about racism. Have you experienced racism? Because now we know that racism impacts your health, right? And they were not allowed to put that question on the survey for reasons unknown. Right? So there's an entire process of adding and taking away questions. So this is the map of who participates. As you can see, I named some of these counties that participated, but now Florida is no longer on there. This is the latest update that we have from the CDC, that they created this own infographic. So as you can see, it's from 2019. So you can see in 2019 which states were participating and which ones weren't. So I will tell you, Florida is no longer participating. Colorado is no longer participating. That's not Colorado. Colorado is stepping there. Colorado is no longer participating. However, what I will say, Colorado replaced the youth risk behavior survey with their own state survey, and it is comparable. I will say that, all right? However, this is me speaking as myself, not like as advocates for youth or anything. I would prefer if they did both, because then we wouldn't lose 30 years of data. Like, you can do your own state survey, sure, but like, what about all of this data that we have for the last 30 years? So I'll say that about that, but it's not necessarily a bad thing that they opted out, I'll say that. Iowa also just announced a couple of weeks ago that they are also no longer participating. So that's Iowa there, so they're no longer participating. This is a dangerous trend of states opting out of this survey data, and we're going to show you some of the data and what we're missing and why it is not good.
Yes, so here we have a lot of what Advocates for Youth has done recently is try to get states, health agencies to maintain the survey. So these are just a few samples. This is not as up to date because Florida just released what the new survey looks like. But we kind of was reaching out to the Florida Department of Ed, Idaho Department of Ed, and the Colorado Department of Ed to say, hey, what's going on with the YRBS? We found out that they all were like, we're not doing it anymore, we're discontinuing. So we took action to work with local organizations to say, hey, you all need to fight back, what can you do? The Florida Policy Institute here, they did a lot of things. They did a press release, op-ed features, a Twitter thread. They were going off about it, right? The Colorado Children's Campaign, they were in calls with the YRBS coordinator there to say, hey, why aren't y'all doing it? And that's when we learned, oh, they're doing their own survey. They got low participation for the YRBS. They're focusing on the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, which they said was more robust and inclusive. So it does have a few more LGBTQ inclusive questions. In addition to reaching out to them, what did we do? So we developed letters to the Department of Health and the Department of Education, urging these agencies to continue participation in the survey. The sign-on letters were from national organizations and states. And then the response we got basically was Colorado, we're focusing on Healthy Kids Colorado. And then in Florida, we got information that we're doing our own survey, don't worry about it, and saying that they're gonna administer it. But according to you recently, the survey is kind of out, or they have the questions, and they're not as robust as the survey they were participating in, correct? So that's just a little bit of how we've been kind of quote unquote fighting back to maintain the surveys.
Can I interject really quick? So I don't want to forget, because I was going to add a slide, but I didn't. Something that I do for Advocates for Youth is I send out a youth risk behavior newsletter, and we talk about how the youth risk behavior survey is being used. It's mostly through studies and articles. So some of my favorite articles that have been published about it is using the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. They found that children of all racial and ethnic backgrounds benefit from diversity education. So even white students who learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion have improved mental health rates, as well as Black children, Latina children, Indigenous children, et cetera, right? So those are the types of surveys that we can use with the YRBS. So what happens when Florida opts out? Can we get that data from Florida, right? There was also another study that was done recently that found that there is a connection or correlation between school attendance and suicidality, right? So that's very concerning. We need that survey data to learn what are the elements contributing to suicidality. School should not increase suicidality, right? Like that should never happen. So we need those survey data to determine what is happening at school that's causing that, because it's not the education itself. Right? There's some other things that are happening in school that are making children feel unsafe or not want to live anymore. So if you would like to receive the YRBS survey, I send it out once a month with a month's worth of how the survey is being used. I have my laptop over there. After this presentation, I'll just get your email and I can add you to that survey. If at any point you're like, hey, I got a new job, I don't want to be on this anymore, you can just email me and say, take me off, that's fine. Or just block me, that's easier for me personally.
I think it's you. I think.
Sure. So the survey itself covers a range of different behaviors and health outcomes. So some of them include unintentional injuries and violence, sexual behaviors, alcohol and other drug use. There's a range of different drugs districts and states might choose to put on the survey. Tobacco use, dietary behaviors, physical activity, and other things. So like asthma, like we tend to, in Chicago Public Schools, we'll look at our internal records, our like 504 plans and other things, like to see what percentage of our students have documented asthma, which is a very different number actually than what we end up seeing on the YRBS. I don't remember now, but it's something like double the rate that we have documentation for of reporting asthma on the YRBS. So that's just one quick example of how the YRBS is really powerful and very useful for us to check if we're actually documenting things correctly or providing the right services to students. No. So how can YRBS data, is this my slide? How can YRBS data support LGBTQIA+ students? So many ways. The data help guide state and school health policies and practices across the nation. So the data can be used to describe the health behaviors, risks, and experiences of our students. And I will say, we're talking about high school. YRBS at the high school level is the kind of the standard one. There is a middle school version. And I know in Chicago Public Schools, we have been, this is our second year, I think. Now I can't remember. I think it's our second cycle doing middle school, and it's been really interesting because there are some differences among some of the data compared to high schoolers. So we can also use the data to monitor and evaluate school-based health interventions. So we can track trends over time. For example, well, yeah, like asthma is a good example, but you can see if it's increasing, if it makes sense, it's like a gut check. Definitely it informs school policies and practices. Although I will say additional, you can run additional analyses, have some epidemiologists do some actual studies using the data, and that can be super powerful as a tool to leverage for different types of policies and practices in schools, including something like perhaps stocking Narcan in schools, like stocking.
Take the water off. Oh, the water behind. It can go on your
chair. So yeah, supporting health-related policies, legislation, and laws. Oh yeah, you can use it for advocacy at the state level, at the national level. And then provide information and support for funding requests. Definitely, we share our data internally and externally with our community partners to be able to show the need for different things among our students. And then informing school and state staff professional development. So we've seen YRBS data in a lot of presentations at this conference, and it's really helpful for grounding our presentations and our content in like the reality that the data shows.
So this is just a quick question for you all. What percentage of LGBT high school students felt sad or depressed almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row in 2019? A, 41.2%, B, 66.3%, C, 34.7%, or D, 87.9%. And I'll let you read that and unpack and guess yourselves too.
And this is nationally.
What do you think?
B.
A.
The chat is guessing A.
A.
The chat is
What are folks saying in the chat?
A.
A. Okay, so the answer is B, which is really interesting and sad, right? That several LGBT high school students felt sad or depressed almost every day for 2 weeks or more in around 2019. How do we find that out? Ideally, we would have computers and stuff, but we're just going to share the slides and just show you all how to figure that out. So ideally, if folks had computers, laptops, what you would do is that you would just Google YRBS Explorer. You would click on the first link, YRBS Explorer 2019, and then you're going to see this. As soon as you see this kind of Explorer, you can type in or search SAD under search questions, and then click tables. Right, do that. So you're going to see sad, felt sad or hopeless. And then, so you're going to scroll down to sexual identity. You're going to find gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and you're going to get that number here. So this is how we found that out. So it's again using the YRBS to figure out, okay, gay, lesbian, or bisexual students, 66.3%. Just bisexual students, 68.2%. Heterosexual or straight students, 32.2%. And that is kind of what we use to really quickly update folks on. Here's how to find out data not only in your communities, but also at a national level. Does that make sense for folks?
So I can type in like Chicago somewhere too, so I can get more specific data.
Yep. And what Booker will do is really quickly just walk through after this one. This is really just an overview. I made this one thinking about like mom, pops, grandparents of like, you want to find something really quick, you can type it in for national level, but Booker will explain also for the very, very localized level too.
Yeah, so for those of you online, you can actually go to the website and check it out and play with it. So this would be an activity. My cell service wasn't good enough to really use my phone. So if you want to try it, you can, but you can also refer to this later. So this would be a data scavenger hunt. Imagine we're doing a data scavenger hunt. This is actually, you can just search CDC YRBS, right? Just Google search it. You don't have to do anything fancy. Then you'll go to the main page and click on results, which is highlighted there. Then you'll choose youth online high school results. There are middle school results available, but we'll focus on high school for this. And then you can see YRBS Explorer, which Amari was just talking about, is there. So next. So then it takes you to this intimidating, potentially looking web page. Don't worry, it's not that complicated. Here you can see, you can select by question. So there's a huge range of questions. You know, we're going to talk about something specific, but whatever you're interested in or your colleagues are interested in, you can probably find here. And then you can choose the location. We're going to focus on Chicago because that's where I live. And then the year here. So so next slide. So then it'll pull up when you select Chicago 2021, which is the most recent data available. This table will show up. Again, like this might look a little intimidating to look at first glance. So it's every question on the survey. So and then there are filters on the left. So you can filter by race, ethnicity, by grade. So you can do all grades or just, select 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th. Sexual orientation you can also do so all sexual orientation or just sexual identity and sex of sexual contacts. So there are different questions asking about identity, and then there's questions asking about behavior. And you may sometimes see different things. So I always like to check both for different indicators just to see if there's a difference. As we know, sexual behavior may not always align with sexual identity. So next slide. So the activity would be looking at the question asking if students did not go to school because they felt unsafe at school or on their way to or from school. So we won't be able to do this, but can you go back actually a slide, please? But you would end up seeing by clicking on that indicator and by choosing the filter for what you want to see, it automatically runs the data for you. So you don't have to, when you get these data from the CDC, in their raw form, it's a lot, it's a lot. So this is a lot simpler to digest. And then you can take a look and go ahead to the next slide again. Some of the interesting findings here, you might compare what percentage of all students in all grades, you're not filtering, and you have a number, whatever that number is, and you can compare it by then searching on just LGBT students. And you can see, you know, among all grades, all races and ethnicities, all sexes is what YRBS has, what that number is. Then you can like parse out even more specifically, you know, ninth graders, you can see like maybe ninth graders feel more unsafe. They do feel more unsafe, at least in Chicago, compared to 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, which I think like makes logical sense. And then you can compare by sex, you can compare by race, ethnicity, and you might find different things, you might not. Yeah, so I recommend like playing around with it if you have, you know, if you're working on a grant or you're working on a research project or you want to bring this to students. I'm not sure who we have. I know we have a music and a history teacher. I'm not sure if you all will be using these data, but if you wanted to have a project around that, this is something students could use in the classroom as well.
I'll say something about that. So you said like music history teacher, you may be surprised what is relevant to you from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, because there was a study that I found that found there was a correlation between youth sports participation and vaping. So children who participate on sports teams are more likely to vape. Why does that happen? Probably peer pressure. Like one person on sports team does it, we're around each other. So you might, in the same way that like a lot of smokers are waiters, like people who work in the food industry are more likely to be smokers, but it's just a peer group thing. So you may find something that's very relevant to your very specific role. I would say stay optimistic. Next slide. Or this is good.
Well, and that too, if you're teaching like competence intervals, like you can do
Yeah.
the competence intervals with the data.
Yes, YRBS data definitely makes a lot of sense in classes. I think any health class should be using YRBS data. I think there are a lot of ways to incorporate it. If you're doing like perhaps in like a civics course, like know your rights type education, teaching students how to find data to advocate for the things that they want to see.
And health disparities.
And yeah, and health disparities.
I think the more teachers that know about it, the more they can direct their students into the data when the students with the teacher's intervention are coming up with ideas for independent projects or science fair projects or social studies projects or, you know, just to keep making our students aware and our teachers aware that this data is there, it's rich, it's something they don't have to cull on their own. Right. It's all there and they can learn how to be better researchers, plus get a lot of information to share in the reports.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Absolutely, I think, you know, internet or like learning to cite your sources and like what is a reputable source, that should be getting taught in a lot of classes. And this, you know, using a government website versus like
TikTok. Well, I heard it on TikTok. Okay, and
so yeah, there are a lot of reasons to use YRBS, and actually now I'm like, oh, now we need a training for all of CPS staff on how to use YRBS. But some of the ways. So okay, we have all of the data. Yes, you have.
This question, is the data like also show like county level?
So
Or just like state level?
So it can be both local and state. It depends on the locality.
If they're participating basically.
Yeah. You can filter for local versus state data and national data. You can filter for that.
Okay.
But of course, not all school districts participate. Like there was a bunch of school districts in Florida, but there's like in Atlanta, I don't think there's any, I mean, in Georgia, I don't think there's any school districts who participate.
Okay.
It's just a statewide data. Yes.
Sorry, I was just thinking about when you mentioned about students using it, like schools that don't have GSAs and the students want to like use that information if they had something on like the, you know, state level helps, but also like county level that showed like, you know, some of the health issues that students are like facing and like their grade range, and that could be a reason for them to like push why we need a GSA like in our school. But I'm not like as familiar with this, so I wasn't sure how it's aggregated.
Yeah, I think something that like if you're in a state or in a local education agency that isn't participating in YRBS, you can use national data. You know, that's why it exists. You can look at it, or you can use neighboring states potentially to try to draw that out. But I think the national data is helpful. If you don't have local data, like I don't know, North Carolina, you probably would want to do like the state level data to do your advocacy. And also, I guess I want to name that like the YRBS is an excellent source of information, but it's also not the only one. So when we're talking about advocating for LGBTQ students, there's a lot of really specific data put out there by like the Trevor Project and GLSEN, which we'll have at the end of this. I really like, especially in our professional development training slides, we like to pair it with other information because the YRBS is robust, but also limited. It has its limitations as any data set does. So some of the ways that we have shared our data in Chicago Public Schools include this CPS LGBTQ Health Equity Report, authored by Marissa, actually, and others on our team. This is with 2019 data, so this is publicly available on our website. If you go to cps.edu, I think if you just type in LGBTQ in the search bar, you can find all of our resources that we make. We try to make everything just available, just put it out there. You can see we have some cute graphs. We have aggressive branding and orange and blue. But yeah, some of these involve some analyses that were done by Marissa to show statistical significance, to be able to communicate the data in a way that like people can make sense of.
One cool thing about this data in particular is that I controlled for other demographics. So like some people will make that claim that like, oh, we're talking about LGBTQ students, like we're only talking about white students. At least that's something people think in Chicago, but like that is those odds ratios, so like over three times that controlled for race, ethnicity, and age and sex. So that's one cool thing about that data.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. So again, we incorporate YRBS data into all of our training slides that our team does, because there's a lot. We work on the sexual health team, so we do LGBTQ student support, sexual health, sexual services. So there's a robust data source for us, but some of our other teams also, like school food professionals, can incorporate some of the information into their trainings as well. We have a health data book as well. There's a new one coming out with the 21 data very soon. It's less focused on LGBTQ students and more general reporting of our YRBS data. And again, what we're really trying to do is get that into the hands of our school leaders, our administrators, our central office staff, certainly, but the people in the schools, and especially the people in the schools who helped administer the surveys in the first place. So, because we want their buy-in in the future. And, you know, Chicago, we have a different political context than certainly like the state of Florida. But we experience the same trends in general from our population. So we have had more schools, especially middle schools, decline to participate. And so 2023 is actively going on right now. So we're getting data right now from our schools, and the middle schools are increasingly like not wanting to do the survey for various reasons. A lot of it, I think, is very like, it's more about like sensitivity to students. There are a lot of questions that can be triggering to students. So some of it's coming from that place. But some of it's just like, we don't want to even, we don't have time, we don't have capacity, we don't have resources. It's so many reasons, but anyway, so we want to share the data back with our schools so that they keep doing the survey, so we can have this information about students. Because otherwise we don't have any of this. We have a school climate survey, but it doesn't ask these questions. It asks some questions like around school connectedness and stuff like that that are very helpful, but not these different health behaviors. So otherwise we would just know nothing. Yes.
So do you know if there are trends in which schools, like the demographics of the schools that tend to decline, or the districts that tend to decline, so we can like make a caveat when presenting like Illinois data, for example, like if the vast majority of the statistics are coming from Chicago, or like the information is coming from Chicago versus like rural areas, and like within Chicago, if all of the schools that are declining are like on the west side, like, do we know that information?
So that is not made public. We know it because at CPS, we administer the CPS survey in-house versus hiring a consultant or something. I know for the state of Illinois, they typically only sample a couple of schools in Chicago. So it's definitely more Illinois than Chicago. But in general, I mean, I can't really speak with expertise to the CDC's like statistical processes, but they assure us that it's weighted. So as long as you achieve a certain threshold of participation, both school and student participation, there's math that happens. And then they tell us that it's weighted data, which means it's statistically representative of the entire school district. And we have to give them on the front end a ton of data about our student demographics at each school, student population, all of that. And so the schools are randomly selected, and then the classrooms are randomly selected within the schools that are selected. So you might have 1 out of 3 classes participate in a school. And, you know, we prefer all of them to, but anyway, so the point is, if it's weighted, it is statistically representative of the whole district.
Okay, so do you know this?
Yeah, well, good question. Yes.
Without going too far down the rabbit hole, do you know why we've seen higher opt-out? Like, so here in Florida, last April, Florida opted themselves out, and so all the local districts said, well, no, we have separate agreements. So the state came back and said, but before that, you know, groups like Moms for Liberty were actively told parents to saying, opt your kids out of this service. So I don't know if
I have a partial answer for that. I will say in my research with the YRBS, there was some articles that came out about 2 months ago around February. I don't know who this parent was. I'm assuming they were powerful or had some powerful connections. As well, you may not know this because we didn't mention it, but the survey questions are public. Like you can see the survey questions. And there was a parent who picked up her child from school and her child said, oh, I was asked if I have sex in school today. And the parent was like, what do you mean you were asked if you have sex? And that's what she learned with the YRBS is. So the middle school question does ask, have you had sex before? Have you ever been forced to have sexual intercourse? And the parent freaked out, and it was all over like CNN and all these major news sources were like, they're asking inappropriate questions to middle schoolers. And I'm like, but the students are saying yes. They're saying they've been forced to have sex. They're saying they've had sex before they're 12. Some of them more than 3 or 4 sexual partners. They're saying, yes, you should be more concerned about what it says than the question. Like, why are you concerned about that? So that caused a huge controversy. And when it hit like CNN, other parents asked, is my child getting? And they're like, yeah, your child is getting this. And they're like, oh, but your child's been getting this for 30 years. Just because you just found out about it, like, doesn't mean that it's somehow now a problem. And of course, now it's getting swept up into the political climate of this grooming language. So they're saying it's connected to that, completely dissimilar. I mean, grooming is not happening. That's number one. Let me say that. So grooming is not happening. And also, this is a question about sexual behaviors and risk behaviors. That's all they're asking. So I know for a fact that that's one of the things that caused a lot of people to start opting out recently.
If their child has been getting that question for 30 years, they have a much bigger problem than that test. Because that first child has been in middle school for 20 years.
Okay.
I would just to add on to that, I also, it's like this, just the same thing as like the way that people think if you teach sex ed, all the kids are gonna go have sex. If you ask them about whether they're having sex, suddenly they're gonna think they're supposed to be having sex and like go have sex. And that's just fine. But I think that's the logic.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, well, we've also used it on a substance use one pager, so you can do like content specific data share outs. Some, I think like right now, mental health is a big focus for a lot of school districts for good reason. There's a ton of mental health and then relatedly substance use information in the YRBS, so it can be really powerful to guide programming and apply for funding in those ways. And then youth-led marketing campaigns. So this morning's presentation by Marissa and Malika and Rihan, the Youth Advisory Council at CPS did use YRBS data to help create their posters. Do you want to talk at all about that?
Yeah, some of them put YRBS data on their posters. So they said like this many students or like this many students have had this thing happen. And so like, or the percentage of students that are trans, I think was maybe on one of the posters about trans student rights.
That's awesome. And these are some other examples of how you can take action with youth risk behavior survey data. So I'm going to just read these. So in 2019, Montana's YRBS data were referenced when passing a bill to ban electronic vaping devices on school property. Idaho's YRBS data were used in 2020 to secure Garrett Lee Smith grant funding, which provides resources and supports for students facing suicide ideation, attempts, or recovery. Yeah, the suicide data, I mean, it's some of the most powerful, striking data. I use it regularly, especially with audiences that are forced to be listening to me, which means not all of them are probably doing all that they can to support, like in particular LGBTQ students. And I think it can really drive home that what we're talking about is life or death, and it's very real and it's very tangible. And I think people who have personal beliefs that are not in line with supporting LGBTQ students, typically, especially those working in education agencies, generally don't want children to die. So like, it tends to be, I think, a really like powerful uniting piece of information that really like it just can, it really like stops a room, you know, when talking about the suicide data. Sorry, I'm just rambling about this, but I think it's really, important, and I really think we all need to be using it. It's touchy, but it's really real, and we cannot be sweeping this under the rug. If we're not talking about it, we're just further stigmatizing talking about mental health and suicide. Okay, in 2021, Connecticut, they cited data in support of state legislative bills to expand preschool access, mental health support, and child behavioral services. And then decision makers in DC used their local YRBS data to develop guidelines for student mental health support, which included adopting policies and procedures to improve school climate, protect the health of every student, and strengthen academic success. So at this point, I'm just curious. I know we have different people, different roles, and different institutions, but whatever your context is, kind of curious, how might you use YRBS data in your role? So we can just brainstorm here. Or how are you already using it? I know Pete's probably using it.
Trainings.
Yeah, trainings. Great.
Our school police use some of the violence data, weapons data to do trainings.
Oh, wow, okay, that's great. Other thoughts?
I'll speak from when me and Kevin were in Broward together, and Broward County Public Schools received, I think it was a $5 million grant to do this local survey. And with that money, we also, since we saw the students were having sex and not using protection, we brought testing into the schools. And so we didn't wait for because most kids are not gonna be like, hey mom, I've been having sex for like 3 years and I have an itch. It's just not gonna happen. That's not realistic. So we brought the testing services directly into the schools. The kids would just go during lunch, get a little poke, get a little blood draw, and go right on back and then get their test results. And we found that 1 in 10 students that we tested were testing positive. The super majority had no idea they had an STI. The super majority did not feel comfortable telling their parents that they had an STI or going to the doctor before, even if they did know, right? So when a Broward opts out of this grant, when Florida opts out, what then happens, right? So, and then when you opt out of the data that says the STI rates are going up, then who knows? So then we see like posters or billboards in Florida that says Florida has a syphilis tsunami. This is why these things are connected. So not only did we use the data to say, hey, we do have an STI problem, we have a lot of students not using protection, but we actually had the action step of bringing testing to them.
I think the piggyback.
And condoms. Go ahead.
And this piggyback, and you talked about the one out of 10, but the other 9 students were learning some life skills. Even a lot of kids would come to the tables not because they thought they might have an STI or HIV. They just wanted the experience, and they wanted to. It was sort of cool, you know, or whatever you want to call it. But just to have us available there, and to have the agencies available, they would come just to take the test. And we had like one situation where a young woman came out and found out that she was HIV because her parents had never told her that she was HIV. So if we hadn't been at the table, if we hadn't made it comfortable enough for her just to say, I think I'm gonna take this test and see what it's like, she wouldn't have had that. But I like to think that even though we're losing a lot here in our services, that in the 5 years we did that, we impacted a lot of kids with what they're now in their 20s now. Hopefully, and our co-colleague Dominic has told us the other day that he still gets phone calls from kids asking questions, even though they might be in college or in a marriage now or something, or in a partnership or in a relationship, they'll get a call. So I think when we don't have, like you were just saying, KJ, when we don't have these programs, and we start to see a rise in these things, people are going, gee, how did we get so high? Well, because we're not providing the direction or the services or the things for kids to look at, or young adults. When I think about 20-something kids.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
But like you were saying earlier, you know, how so many people say, I'm sorry, you. How many people say, oh, we don't have those kids in our school.
Yeah.
Well, now that we're not asking the question,
You can do.
oh, you have those kids in school, prove it.
Yeah.
Where's your data?
Yeah.
You don't have any.
We also use it for our condom availability program, like to justify it, because we've seen so much declining in like the number of students who report that they've had sexual intercourse. But if you look at the condom use data, like it's just flat. Like there's still like 40% of students say they didn't use a condom the last time they had sex. So we use that to justify our condom availability program.
Yeah, and I kind of want to point out too, the national survey does not have the transgender status question, but at CPS we do have it.
It does this year.
Oh, it does this
The
year.
national
Okay,
one
it does
has it
this
for the
year.
question, for the first time this year.
2021 it didn't. But we also then in 2021 at Chicago Public Schools. So my first job at CPS was running YRBS in 2017. So I know it very intimately. I did a lot of bubbling of scantrons and erasing of the stray marks. But anyway, I always felt like even when we got the first set of trans data, which was around 2% of students, I was like, that just feels so low. Like, I know so many students are trans and like adults are trans, or like, trans umbrella. So we added a question on gender identity as an optional question that Marissa and I and some of our colleagues workshopped. And I'm so excited because we have really cool new numbers that I just want to share here. I don't have a slide for it. I texted it to Chris from Texas. So we asked a question like, what is your gender identity? And we made it as inclusive as possible. Do you remember the specifics? It was like girl, female, boy, male,
Yes.
non-binary. This is like a pop quiz.
It
for
was
us.
like non-binary, agender, or agender, I think was an option. And then, I don't remember.
And then like, I don't know what this question is asking or something like that. So hot off the presses, y'all. 9.3% of our high school students identify as like trans or gender expansive. So that, or questioning their gender identity or transgender status. So my point, and then it's actually 11% of our middle school students. It's 11%. It's more of our middle school students. And actually that tracks with our LGBTQ umbrella data. It's a little bit more of our middle school students compared to our high school students, which I find fascinating. And so I like to pop quiz our staff when I have a PD to see what they think. And actually a lot of them know. A lot of them are like, yeah, like a third. I'm like, yeah, I guess like you're probably a supportive educator if you know that. And I will say that too, to kind of call that in. But yeah, so it's identify as trans, non-binary, gender fluid, agender, gender non-conforming, or questioning their gender identity or transgender status, because it's two different questions. So that's a mouthful, but that is, obviously 9 or 11% is way different than 2%. It's so much bigger. And I just feel like that is so much more, it feels more accurate. Like the gut check is much more in line. So yeah.
I love that. I would love to see the questions that you added, but even just this year, CDC, kudos, because in 2019, the options were like lesbian, gay, bisexual,
Unsure.
and unsure. And now this year it's another sexual identity. I'm questioning, I'm not sure. And that kind of opened it up, as well as the transgender question being, I am transgender, I'm not sure if I'm transgender, and no, I'm not. Because we got 3.1% that said that they were transgender, but we got another like 3.9% that said they didn't know if they were transgender, because it didn't include non-binary gender.
And I personally just like theoretically, from a philosophical standpoint, I think it's very important to include the questioning students when reporting the data out. It's important to state that you're including them, but the reality is these students, whether or not they end up like identifying as cis, trans, non-binary, whatever that it is, like they are grappling with this. So it's important for them to receive the support, no matter if they end up identifying as cis or not. They're in a process of questioning, which is developmentally appropriate at all ages, including adulthood. And that is something that I think a lot of educators need to hear and really like take in, because it's not just the openly out ones. It's not just the ones who are closeted, it's those who are just like, I don't know, like, am I trans? I don't know, let me think about that. Like, ideally we would all think about that at some point in our lives, because you might find something new about yourself.
How much of this gets covered in like the Chicago Tribune?
That's a funny question. The most accurate, not very much.
Well, the Sun-Times had done a really great article about how I'm gonna look it up. Do you remember? It was the principal at, I think it was you that wrote the article about supporting trans students.
So it was Seth Lavin, who's actually the principal at an elementary school in Logan Square. But yes, so that was an op-ed. But yeah, it was a principal wrote recently an op-ed in support of trans students that made me cry at the doctor's office for my HRT appointment during my HRT appointment. But no, they don't really cover it that much that I've seen. But you know what is weirdly the most accurate reporting on our work that has ever happened? Fox News. Fox News reported on our mandatory supporting transgender, non-binary, and gender expansive youth training because the slides were public because our charter schools can't access it because they don't have CPS email accounts for the most part. So it was just publicly available, and then that got into the hands of some conservatives, and they were very accurate. I was like, yeah, like I'm so proud of this training. And then there was like one like paragraph that's like, just the dog whistles and the nonsense that like, it was literally like a nonsensical to me paragraph, but everything else was like really accurate. And no, the Tribune has not reported this before. So people don't like to report the good stuff,
Well, I'm also just curious because if in Florida, it's not even a possibility of getting that information, then the media can't cover it, except for to say that it's not there.
Right.
And that presents far greater problems.
Sure. No, it's an interesting question to think about how, to what extent maybe the mainstream media should or can like access the data and like use it. I've seen YRBS data reported in news reports, but it's not typically like a really robust thing. But I don't know, if anybody finds anything, let me know.
As the person who literally tracks this, I use a Google alert for the YRBS. So literally every single thing on the internet ever published that mentions the YRBS, I track and read because I publish these news articles and I have to read them to see if they're accurate. And not every article gets published because there are some people who just publish BS. Like Breitbart, for example, used the YRBS survey. And their interpretation of the data was heterosexual children are healthier than LGBT children.
Wow.
That was they used the same exact data, but their interpretation was, you don't want your kid to be gay because they're all sick in the head. That was their interpretation. That was the entire article. And I couldn't even finish the article. I was like, I'm not publishing it anyway. But I was just like, Jesus. As soon as I see Breitbart, I'm not publishing anything for Breitbart. It's just not an accurate source. This is not my bias. They are biased. Like they are inaccurate. So it's out there. People are talking about it. And there have been some major news outlets in Florida who have criticized Florida for opting out of the YRBS survey because the 2021 survey data found that I think it was, I don't want to guess the number, but a significant number of girls in particular, but all children, especially LGBTQ children and girls, reported that they were forced to have sexual intercourse in the last 2 years. And it was like, how did that happen? They were at home at COVID. They were at home. Most people are attacked by people they know. There's this idea, Law and Order SVU got people messed up. Honestly, truly, like that's one of the worst shows as far as like education around sexual violence. Y'all think it's like The Thief in the Night, but most of the time it's a family member, an intimate partner, or a former intimate partner, right? So we needed that data. So people are like, if this is such alarming data, why are you opting out right now? And the answer is because you cannot pass anti-LGBTQ legislation and then have survey data results saying that it was harmful to your children, right? Like you can't have both of those things showing that at the same time. So yeah, then on this slide, same thing. We don't just use the YRBS survey, we use it with other surveys. The Trevor Project in particular recently published an article saying that they have proved now that LGBTQ children have said that anti-LGBTQ legislation is causing higher rates of depression and anxiety. Right, so we can use the YRBS survey data to say how many children are LGBTQ and what they're saying their mental health is like, and then use the Trevor Project to say there is a correlation between anti-LGBTQ legislation and harm on LGBTQ youth. Right, so that's how you can kind of use this data. And if you don't have, I forgot who asked the question about if you don't have it locally, I think you did, Danielle. GLSEN does have some local survey data as well. Trevor Project has some more local survey data as well. The Williams Institute has some more local survey data as well. So you can kind of pair them.
Yeah, GLSEN has the state snapshots. And
I think that's some depending on if they have a locality to do it. Okay. I think they do more local than that.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely recommend these sources. They're very helpful. And that's our presentation. So questions about YRBS data or any of these things we've been talking about.
Good.
With some of these states now starting to opt out, and again, it seems to be politically motivated, is there now a concern that it may actually, CDC may be forced to, depending on the administration, forced to drop it. This survey, say if we get a very conservative administration in the future. Has there been any grumblings in CDC or has there been any pressure put on CDC?
I don't know, but I know we have one CDC representative here. I would say like that would be very unlikely.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely.
Very in any immediate way, but do you have any other thoughts?
Well, it all depends on, not just the president, but also Congress. So you're thinking about who you elect as president, who you elect as your senator, who you elect as your congressman. So they make decisions too. So in that sense, but we are, we're employees of, Congress and the president. So that's all I can say about that.
But the YRBS has
It
been,
takes time though.
it's been in existence since 1991, correct? Is that 91? So I don't know. I think that the longevity of it is in its favor. Literally the purpose is to track trends over time. Like that's the purpose of surveillance data. It's surveillance because we're like looking at it over time. So that's a great question, and that's kind of the worst case scenario. But yeah.
You talked about states that are dropping out. Are there other states that are coming in that haven't done it?
That's a good question.
How does the CDC recruit or find ways to encourage states to get on board that?
There is funding. Our data is tied with funding that we get.
Yeah, so these are the states that did not do it in 2019.
Yeah.
I will say some of those states do their own surveys. So I don't see them going back to the YRBS because they say we replaced the YRBS with our own data.
And I was struck by this slide because I noticed Minnesota did not participate yet.
Yeah.
The people that we've had occasion to work with from Minnesota over the years, that surprised me. So they must have their own.
They have their own survey, but if you know them, you can always promote it and ask them. And honestly, there's like funding and stuff that, CDC pays for folks to do it and create it, but we've been trying a lot to even work with, Oregon to say, hey, we know Portland participates, why don't you? And they're kind of like, well, we have our own. So that's the thing too. They're recognizing and looking at, sadly, the limitations of it. Like y'all aren't asking a good question on gender. Y'all aren't asking a good question on sex, right? So they are very much like, we have our own, but thanks. But I think they're always looking, or it's always helpful for folks like you to reach out to people to say, hey, why aren't you? Or I just attended your presentation. What might you think about states that are opting out for you all to finally opt in and say it is useful? So I think it's a helpful strategy if you.
So you're saying that it's likely that Minnesota has data. That
Yes.
just isn't.
Oh yeah, they have their own.
It's just not the YRBS.
Just
data.
knowing the people that.
They're definitely, I know that they definitely are one of the groups that have their own, very much so like Colorado, because we did a whole scan of like, why are other states not participating? And Florida was for its own reason, like, everything going on. But most states that already aren't, we're like, oh, we have our own. Like we're familiar with it, very similar questions, but very like we're doing our own thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes the questions are better.
Yeah.
Like Colorado was like, they're asking a lot of questions about racism and LGBTQ, and the YRBS just was not asking
Or just
the same
the question
number.
about racism. They're like, we've been doing that
Yeah.
for about 5 years.
Yeah.
So
there's not the incentive there, but the payment is the incentive. When they say, we'll give you this money,
Sure.
because that's a lot.
I think one can interpret why Florida opted out, but it was just so pain-inducing to not only that we're losing the trend data, but we had a survey in place. It was being paid for through the grant. The evaluation of it was being paid for. The dissemination of the information was being paid for. So I don't know where, where's the people to stand up, but where's the taxpayers saying, hey, why are you spending money on this when we already had an instrument in place at the state level and at at least six? I think a couple more, I don't know if a couple more actually do it or not, but it's already in place. Why would you spend this money to vet whatever vetting they did, and put this group together and come out with this instrument that may not have any relevance anyway?
that was our thing too, of like telling folks, especially the Florida policy institute, of like, argue that they're rejecting dollars. They're rejecting thousands of dollars.
Millions.
No, they
Millions.
millions of dollars.
It was 5 million in Broward alone,
Yeah.
in Broward alone, and all of these counties have had it. So.
The other, I want to like just point out too, like the other powerful thing about having many locations do the YRBS is that researchers can run other analyses. They can aggregate the data from different places. For example, actually, Amante, you have done some of that work with the All Students Count Coalition. Do you want to speak at all about some of that?
Yeah.
This
So
is
one more time.
putting you on the spot.
Give it to
Sorry,
me one more
aggregating like different like state data to create a larger data set in
Yeah.
order to run more robust analyses.
Yeah, so if you all check out advocatesforyouth.org/YRBS, we've done several analyses with partners to really explore like trans students of color and what are the disparities based on this data. A while back, we did one with Black trans youth in sports participation, because looking at thinking outside the line. The most recent one we did was looking at substance use. It was like substance use and tobacco or something like that. It was a really cool report to show like trans students are not only experiencing violence at schools, but also are more likely to use tobacco, electronic vaping, and things like that. So yeah, advocatesforyouth.org/YRBS will give you a bunch of those survey studies that come out. Yeah, thank you. I should have probably included that, but yeah.
There's so much more we can
there's several
say.
reports that we've done.
Yeah, there's so much more we could say, I think is the conclusion. And also I'll just put the bias out there because like I'm not a full-time employee, I'm just a consultant for Advocates for You. So I feel like I can say what I want. We definitely put this together in hopes that people would say, we need this data and go to whomever you need to go to make sure that your state does not opt out. Like that's the quiet part, I'm saying it out loud. Like we want you to, you ask, why doesn't this state? Ask those people and tell them to go. Like I literally was just having a conversation with you yesterday saying, I need to figure out what I need to do to get Atlanta and a school district in Atlanta to do this survey. Because to miss data in Atlanta, I feel like it's just so harmful because it's so diverse and so queer. So yeah, that's what we want you to do. We want you to start asking those questions and find out how you can do it and tell people there's funding associated with it. It could be a nonprofit, school agency, any type of related agency can get this money to do this survey.
Yeah, so thank y'all so much.
Thanks for your time.